Hello.
We are games animals.
Video games heaven indeed. Definitely my favourite joystick handlers, the two angels from season 5 of GamesMaster. Welcome back to GamesAnimal TV. It's been a while, I know, and that's put me in a bit of a Games Mastery kind of mood. Lately, at the time of filming this, there's been a lot of rumours about E4 doing a reboot of the show. I've had a lot of messages and emails about whether or not I'm going to be involved in that. But just for now, I think we'll take a look at the birth of GamesMaster, and if you're up for it, I'll share a few anecdotes about how we put the show together in the early days. So sit tight, get a cup of tea. This is probably going to go on for a little while, and here we go. I had a year or so before moved to London in my Mini with no idea where I was going to live. I ended up lodging in Great Hallingbury with a lovely couple called Bob and Polly, and it was from there that I started producing magazines and writing properly. Word had got out because every day I was talking to softcos about product for the magazines for intermediates, that's who I was working for and producing magazines for. And when Hewland International decided to put together the country's first video games TV show, they wisely asked about as to who would be a good idea to have on board, I guess. And they advertised in the papers, and people came to me and said, you know, have you seen, there's a TV show coming out about video games, etc. And I went and saw Hewland and got the gig, which was ideal. Now, that's cutting a long story short. The truth of the matter is I took a huge pay cut to do GamesMaster. At the time, I was the publishing manager for the largest software importer in Europe, and I wasn't earning crazy money, but I was earning decent money for me at the time, you know, first proper job and all that. And I had to take a pay cut to go and work in central London in Isle of Dogs, and it was a big consideration for about 5 seconds. By then I'd moved to Harlow, and I used to have to get up at about 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning, something like that. Drive my Mini, which was not the most reliable car in the world, had no heating, and it got very cold in Harlow, and I would drive to Epping Station. From Epping Station I would catch what I think was the District line into I can't remember, it might have been Stratford, somewhere like that. But then I had to change to get on the Light Dockland Railway. The Light Dockland Railway was a new thing because Canary Wharf was only just really getting going, and the Light Dockland Railway was sometimes reliable, sometimes not. And from then I would go in on the train on the Light Dockland through the new Canary Wharf Tower, which was amazing to see, and into the Isle of Dogs, where there was a lot of banking, a lot of famous people walking around, and for me this was a wonderland. It used to take me hours, that journey, every morning, and I'd be on the train, I'd look at other people on that train nursing cups of coffee, reading the papers, and they'd look ashen, they'd look half awake, half dead, but it was worth it, you know. I was I was living the dream, you know, not in the way that I had tons of money, cars, you know, a great lifestyle, but I was doing what I wanted to do. I was working in television on a video games TV show. So these were amazing times. The Hewland International offices were one of these modern new offices that had been put on the Isle of Dogs, and it was all glass fronted. It was nearly all glass, to be honest with you. Very, very modern looking. It felt great to go and work there. And when we sat down in that office for the first time, I remember my first day walking in. We just had very, very basic tables and chairs. I don't think there was any drawers. They weren't proper desks. They were almost like school tables. And we sat there, and no one knew what to do. I mean, obviously the guys who had done TV before Adam and Cameron. Adam was the producer, Cameron was the director. They had an idea what was required, but they'd never done a video games TV show before. And myself and Steve Carsey, who was the other game researcher on the show, we never done television full stop. So we were all there helping each other out. There was 5 of us in total, outside of the major Hewland staff like Jane, etc. But on the show itself specifically, there was Chris Kelly, who was in charge of celebrity booking and booking contestants and that kind of thing. There was myself and Steve, who were the games experts. And there was Adam, who was the producer, and Cameron, who was the director. Cameron was an amazing guy, real eccentric, very English, great sense of humour. Adam had a great sense of humour as well, more of a cutting wit, and he was a bit more sensible. He was a bit more level-headed. He balanced the whole thing out. And me and Steve were just in awe of the whole procedure. And I remember sitting there, and this had never been done before. No one had ever made a TV show before about video games. And we didn't know what was involved. I mean, obviously we knew what the best games were. At the time, obviously, we knew what the best systems were at the times. We knew the software companies. But there were lots of decisions to be made that no one had thought of making before. Like, you might enjoy playing Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master was a great game on the Amiga at the time. But how do you get a challenge, a 2.5-minute challenge out of Dungeon Master? And of course, a lot of games at the time didn't have multiple save points in them, so you couldn't just go, say you had a level 6, and you wanted to do a challenge on it because it was a really good level. You couldn't, on the day of the show, try to play that game all the way through to level 6 just to do that challenge, and then it goes wrong and we have to play it through again. We had to find games that we could start exactly where we wanted to, and that would be suitable for 1 or 2 player challenges, and would be visually interesting to the audience. It was a whole new thing. Video games had never been looked at in this way before. So it was all new to us. We had to very much make it up as we went along. I remember a classic example. I'm sat there thinking, I've got to earn my crust. I've got to be worthwhile here, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So I started phoning around all the software companies, introducing myself, telling them what we were doing, asking them if they would be involved, and of course they all would. And then I started negotiating prizes, because I thought, well, we're a show, we're having challenges, we've got to have prizes on the show for the contestants. So yeah, so I started organising things like holidays, games consoles, better than that, arcade machines, because this was television, you know. I wanted something major. I was negotiating up, and I went to the guys with a whole list of prizes, great prizes for these kids to win. And we looked into it. Of course, we had no idea that Channel 4 at the time had a limit as to what you could win on children's television or on young person's television, whatever the show came under, and we couldn't do the prizes. And so that was a challenge just straight away. How do we reward these people? So we decided we had to have an award as a reward. And that was when I was fortunate enough to be talking to a guy called Richard Secular. I think it was Quick Shot or Quickjoy, Spectra Video. They marketed peripherals, and I was talking to him about the problem I had, because he was a nice guy, we got on well. And he said, well, we've got a bunch of these golden joysticks sitting around. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, when we have retailers that sell a certain amount of our peripherals, at the end of each year, the top ones get awarded golden joysticks, and we give them this award. We've got more than we need. We're not doing it anymore. They're sat in the warehouse. How about those? Yeah, light bulb moment. So I said, well, send me one in, and I'll take a look. It came in, the original golden joystick in its plastic case, and it was absolutely perfect. I showed it to Jane and Adam, and that became the golden joystick. That's how the award came about, was purely just phoning around and brainstorming, and somebody just happening to have 19 golden joysticks sat in a warehouse somewhere. So that's how the golden joystick came about. And then so gradually we started playing through games. We started showing Adam and Cameron the games, and showing them what was involved in video gaming, the top games, and they started to appreciate more what would be usable and what wouldn't be usable. And we had some great times in those offices. We all got on fantastically. All 5 of us. We had very similar senses of humour, and we just had a real laugh constantly. We socialised outside of the office sometimes, but also in the office. They were just great times. Great times. What a good bunch of people. I mean, talking about hiring just right for the job, Hewland did a great job, because we all got on and we were all creative, and everybody at some point had some input into how that show went, which made us all feel valid. We're playing games, we've got our golden joystick, but we still don't know, we're still working out what the format's going to be. And that was when I was very determined that the show itself was going to use journalists that were already in the games industry, because at that time there was no internet, and as games players, as games fans, we all got our information from the magazines, and the guys who wrote on those magazines, they were like gods to us, gaming gods to us, you know. People like Jazza Rignall and David Wilson at Zero, those guys, you know, for us, we hung on their every word. You know, we needed them to give us reviews, to give us the stories, to give us the news on what games were coming out. And I knew that for the gaming community, such as it was at the time in the early 90s, you know, those were the guys they trusted. And this was a chance for them to actually see the guys who wrote the words that they hung on every week. So I was very insistent that we should have some of the leading games journalists in. We got them in for the co-commentator roles. We screen tested some of them. We screen tested some of them in case they might be good for the main presenting role. But also we had things like the consultation zone and reviews. And it was important that we use these guys. These guys gave us a certain credibility, a link to the market that was already there, and it rubber stamped the show that these guys were on there. Plus, it was exciting for me to meet them. I was a fan. I was a very keen gamer at the time. I was winning competitions. I was writing for magazines, but I hadn't met these guys that worked on magazines like Zero and Mean Machines and CMVG and See You Amiga and magazines like that I was buying every week. So for me to meet these guys and to talk to them, that was a pretty big deal as well. So I knew if I was excited, then the TV audience would be excited. So, and of course, we had to find a presenter for the show. This time, actually, rewind a bit. Before the presenter, we had to decide on the concept and the venue. And Adam and Cameron went out and saw a few venues, and they came back one day and told us they'd found this church in the middle of London. Deconsecrated church, and it sounded marvellous. Very excited about that idea. And we went along and we looked in the church, and what a feeling when I first walked in that church. And you get that kind of like cold, eerie reverence that you have from religious buildings. And I just thought, we're going to build an arcade in here, you know. And it felt so naughty, it felt so punk, it felt so anarchic, you know. And talking to Cameron and Adam more, you know, we were talking like, yeah, we can get coin ops. We can put coin ops down the side of the church to make it an arcade. I can speak to Sony. We can get monitors in the pews. We can put the audience in the pews. Challengers can walk down the middle of the church, down the aisle. The presenter can be in the pulpit. And the more we talked about it, the more wrong it was, but the more right it was, for all the wrong reasons, if you know what I mean. And we were going to do the country's first video game show from inside a church, which was fucking brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So anyway, once we had the venue, we started interviewing for presenters, and we interviewed them in the venue. We took them into the church, and we made them screen test, you know, on the pulpit, so we could see what they would look like in situ, as it were. And we would do game challenges and have them commentate and things like that. And I would stand to one side of whoever was screen testing, and I would help them co-commentate, and they would very much like the show panned out, how myself and Dominic would stand in the pulpit, or myself and Dexter, and the main presenter would link things along and keep things going smoothly, while the commentator would throw in all the expert knowledge. So we did that, and I always wanted somebody very, very famous to be our presenter, because I was new to television and I was excited, and the idea of meeting celebrities was part of the reason of being in television. Having somebody unknown, that wasn't so good for me, because I just wanted to meet famous people. Of course I did. I was young, and I was starstruck, and I was working in television for the first time. And Dominic came along, and we'd seen a number of people before Dominic came along. And what happened was there was a music show across the road from us called The Word, which used to go on a Friday night. We knew the guys over there, and they used to put our names on the door so we could go in and see all the top bands and everything on a Friday night and watch the show. And they had been interviewing for presenters a little while just before we set up. And so Jane asked them if we could look at their tapes. And so we looked through those, and Dominic was one of those guys. And we invited him in. And it was very clear he had something different from everyone else.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to GamesMaster, television's first ever video game magazine show, especially designed for people out there who find Pictionary pointless and Kaplunk a waste of marbles.
What a great choice. I remember reading something a little while back when Game of Thrones started, and it was the producers of Game of Thrones, and they were saying with Emilia Clarke, that she was a gift, that she was unknown, and she came along and she was absolutely perfect for the role, and she nailed it. And Dominic, very much the same, obviously without the allure of Emilia Clarke, but he came along. He was unknown. We had tried a few more known presenters, but Dominic was obviously right for the role. He absolutely nailed it, and he made that role his own. I do think Series 3 has been much maligned over the years, but Dominic will forever be associated with GamesMaster, and he made it very unique. He brought a very unique sense of humour and edginess to a show that was largely watched by kids. And he's a great guy. In the early days we had some real fun together, and I really enjoyed working with him. After season 3, the relationship was very, very strained. We've never sat down and had a beer to discuss why that happened, and it's a damn shame, because on screen it really worked, myself and Dominic, the edgy sort of guy with the northern accent, and myself, obviously the kind of nerdy, handsome guy with all the game knowledge. Jane took the tapes home and she showed them to her son Harry, because Harry had been the original motivation behind the show, because I think he'd had a copy of Duck Hunt, and that was when Jane realised, Jane being the owner of Hewland International, who produced GamesMaster, the enthusiasm people had for these games and how visual they were. So she would take them home and show them to Harry and his friends, and they liked Dominic. They particularly liked Dominic. They completely identified with him and found him hilarious. And I think that was a key factor in him ultimately getting the job. So we had our presenter, and we had our venue, and we had our main accolades. So everything was coming together nicely. So Dominic would start coming in the studio some days and sitting in with us and playing video games with us, etc., and having his input. And it was a really, really fun team. I remember we had a Christmas party there one year. Hewland threw a Christmas party for us all, and they threw it in their actual office, in the office we worked in every day, which I don't recommend any company doing really, but they did. And we had a karaoke machine and drinks and food. But around that time, I was a little bit out of control. I was quite a bad boy around that time in my early 20s. I was a little bit wild, and I got a bit drunk, and I remember doing Sex Machine by James Brown on the karaoke and everything. And at some point, one of the directors of Hewland went to the toilet, and I quickly rustled everybody together. We got all the bin bags and the bins, and we piled them up in front of the toilet door. So when he came out, he was stuck in the toilet. It was a real hoo-ha. We thought it was the funniest thing in the world. Rubbish just flew everywhere as he tried to open the door. But I don't think the directors found it that funny. They had a little word with me, shall we say. But that was just the kind of stuff we got up to. We just had a real good time making that show. Now, the GamesMaster himself, that's always an interesting story. Obviously, Patrick Moore was perfect for the role and is iconic and always associated with the show. When you think GamesMaster, you think of Patrick Moore with that monocle or whatever, and the bop, 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 bop sort of voice. Bloody brilliant. How did it come about? Well, he wasn't our first choice. As you can imagine, when we were putting the show together, the original concept was we wanted a child to be the GamesMaster. Long before the Teletubbies had that baby in the sun, we thought about having a child in the sky who was officiating over the show. The thinking being that at that time, most gamers were young and the older generation didn't really get it. So it seemed to make sense that the GamesMaster should also be young. Now, we screen tested a bunch of youngsters, a bunch of child actors, etc. for the role, but no one could really nail it. Nobody really could put that kind of gravitas on the role that we wanted. And then I don't remember where we were, but one day it just came up, Patrick Moore, because he looks like a big baby. And that was the idea, because he was quite a round guy and he had quite gentle features. And we all thought he looked like a big baby. We thought, what an idea. Why, if we can't get a child, get an adult that has that kind of childish quality about them? So the guys got Patrick Moore in, and of course, the rest is history. He was perfect. He would read his lines perfectly, and that voice and that kind of games mastery attitude absolutely was perfect for the show. I can't imagine anyone else doing it. And if the show ever comes back again, it'd be interesting to see who they get for the role. I mean, I'd quite like to see somebody from the original show become the GamesMaster, in a kind of a Doctor Who sort of scenario. But no, Patrick Moore, great choice, great guy, and sadly missed. And filming, once we started filming, I mean, it was just magical. We only had, I think, 6-7 days to film it in. That we did the whole series in 6-7 days in that studio, in that church. And of course, for myself, at this point, it's virgin territory for me. I don't know what I'm doing, and I've walked into that church, and in my head, I've got an idea how it's going to be. And when we finally get there, and the first time that Cameron and Adam turned on the lights and the lasers and the dry ice machines, or smoke machines they were, I think, and the boom camera came down the aisle and we could see through the monitors what it was going to look like, it was just magic. It just took your breath away. I mean, that season still, for me, is the best looking of all the GamesMaster seasons, because it was exactly as we conceived it. And I think maybe that was my problem as the show went on and I saw the show moving further and further away from what it was supposed to be in the early days. I was perhaps the only person left with that connection to the early days, which made me a bit resistant to the changes, perhaps. But everything about that show, when you watch it now, I mean, take a look behind me, it was just unique. I loved the fact that you could see the cameras in some of the shots. I loved the fact that everything was hinted with a green, a nice sort of almost like an Aliens Ridley Scott sort of green. There was smoke blowing around, there was lasers. The GamesMaster appeared above the pulpit. We obviously not, when we were filming, we couldn't see him. He wasn't really there. He was put in afterwards. But everything about it was just wonderful. The arcade machines around the side of the church. It just was. It felt rough and ready. It felt raw, and that was great. Some of the later seasons for me got a little contrived, got very stale, very formulaic. But that first show, that first season, those first few shows, that was just wonderful. It was just great times. Now, the guests on the show, obviously a big part of GamesMaster was that we had a celebrity challenge every episode. And when you look back on those old shows, the guests are very of the time. But it was always very exciting to get a celebrity in. I remember when Eric Bristow pulled up outside, it was almost like royalty arriving. I mean, everyone was very excited. The taxi was here and Eric Bristow had arrived, and word came in from the runners that Eric Bristow was here, and we were very, very excited. Let me think about others. John Fashanu was a nice guy, good guy when he came on the show. He was a shoe-in for the show because he'd been doing a show with Jane Hewland before she did GamesMaster. I can't remember, it was like a health and fitness show. So it was nice to see him, Fash the Bash. Who else did we have on? Emlyn Hughes, who was a footballing legend, obviously Crazy Horse, had been the captain of England at one point and the captain of Liverpool, one of their great sides. He was a bit of a moaner, but that tends to be the way with Scousers, I believe. Who else did we have on? Annabelle Croft. She's our first bit of GamesMaster Totty, I think. I might be wrong on that, but I think that was the first time we had somebody on, and we're very aware that they were super hot. Because back then, I mean, season 1 and 2, you look back at those shows, and the whole thing of having gorgeous women on the show, so Dominic could make lots of innuendo about them and that. That hadn't really started then. The celebrities were still there to play the games. We had Gary Mason on, who was a big boxer at the time. Let me have a think. My one disappointment on that show with the celebrities, I think, was we were supposed to have George Best on. I'd spoken to, I think the company was Chrysalis at the time, not completely sure about that, but they had a Manchester United license game. And so I'd spoken to them and their programmers, and they made a special version of the game which had the Manchester United greatest team of all time and the Liverpool greatest team of all time. I think I gave them the two teams that I thought were the greatest teams of all time. And the idea was we would have Emlyn Hughes in playing Liverpool, and we would have George Best in playing Manchester United. Now, there's a little bit of motive on my behalf because George Best was an absolute hero of mine, absolute hero of mine. I was so excited we were going to get him in on the show and I was going to get to meet him. But unfortunately, he had a little bit of a reputation for being somewhat unreliable, and it got vetoed before we ever booked him. So I was a bit disappointed at that. Other guests, Barry McGuigan was a great guy, lovely guy, just what you would expect. And of course we had a wrestler, Kendo Nagasaki. Now, back in the day, once again, looking at the 90s, I mean, WWF was coming along. You had Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and later on in the show we would get some of those big American wrestlers. But right now we were very small time compared to how we would be with our guests later on, if you were like, no offense meant. And so we were using very British celebrities, and Kendo Nagasaki was part of the British wrestling scene back then. And British wrestling was great because we used to have it on mainstream telly around 12:30 every day, you know, with Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and people like that, and of course Kendo Nagasaki. So getting one of those wrestlers in was very, very good. And of course he wore the mask, because the thing with Kendo Nagasaki was he never removed his mask. Man of mystery. So yeah, the celebrities were good. It was nice to have famous people on the show. As I've mentioned elsewhere in this episode, I was very starstruck in those days. And of course the money. We started filming and we had our first winners, and we had a cassock there, but no one had actually thought about who was going to bring the prizes on or how the prizes were going to come on. For some reason that had gone past us, you know, and so the cassock was there and they needed a monk, so of course I put my hands up, I'll do that. And yeah, so I was the monk and bringing the joysticks on in the first season, so that was pretty good. I enjoyed doing that. It just was, once again, it was another connection with the show, and I always wanted to be in front of the camera. Once I got a taste of television, I got in there, I realized that was where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be behind the camera. I wanted to be in front of the camera. And at some point I said to Cameron, you know, I'd like to be in front of the camera. And fair to him, he screen tested me, and they gave me the co-commentator's job, you know, one of the co-commentator's jobs on the first season, which was a huge breakthrough for me. You know, sort of like 5 or 6 months earlier, I'd got my first job working for a TV company, and there I was actually on TV. So absolutely wonderful times. I remember the wrap party. I'm going to put some pictures up now from my own personal collection. And we finished filming the whole of that first season, like I say, in 6-7 days. And we went out for curry, and we went out and we had lots of lager and curry and got very pissed. And I remember we went to the nightclub in London called the Electric Ballroom, it was called at the time. We went in there, and one of the machines wasn't working, and so I picked it up and slammed it down, and the doorman threw us out. And yeah, standard fare for us back then. You know, we were a proper good team of young video game pirates, if you like. We were fucking shit up, and it felt great. And the fact that the show now is still so well loved is a tribute to the love we put into it. At the end of the run, I decided I needed to go back to magazines. I missed magazines, and as much as I love being on television and in television, I missed the magazines. And Jane said to me, she thought I should stay in television. She said, "You're a television person." And I said, "Yeah, but I miss magazines. I'm a magazine person as well. I need to write." I missed being able to put my opinion across about games so much. So I was the first person of the team to leave, because television is always on very short contracts. You're only employed while they're making the show, and I didn't know what the next move would be for me in television anyway. I mean, my love was video games. It wasn't necessarily television. I loved this because it was video games television. So we all went out to the pub for my last dinner, and it was there that Cameron and Adam presented me with the last of the golden joysticks that had been left over from production, and for my work on the show, and for coming up with the concept of the golden joystick in the first place. So that was a lovely moment. It was nice of them to give that for me. At the time, I probably didn't realise what a great gesture that was, but now I do, and you know, I really appreciate that they did that for me. And that's it for this episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of those stories as much as I enjoyed telling them. That was a great show. Those were great days, and I'm so glad it's still so well received. Let's get on board if E4 want to reboot it. It would be nice to see mainstream TV get a show again in whatever guise, you know. And I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.